Spencer Mancillas. And this is what he wrote as introduction for us. I am originally from Saginaw, Michigan, where I lived for most of the first 20-ish years of my life. I work as an attorney, practicing what is generally called poverty law, think SPLC, though I mostly practice family law. I now live in Lexington and have for almost 10 years with my wife and our 1-year-old Ewan. I work with my wife, Lindsey, at a nonprofit law firm she started called Micah Legal. After spending the first 7-ish years of my career at legal aid of the Bluegrass, I went to the University of Michigan, where I was an English major for undergrad, and I was still and still am a huge fan of the Wolverines. And I went to the University of Cincinnati College of Law for my law degree, which is where Lindsey and I originally met. I speak conversational Spanish. I'm half Mexican on my dad's side, hence the Mancillas, and have like a 4-year streak in Duolingo for Japanese, but still speak and understand very little of it. I can relate. I mostly spend my free time with our little one, but when I get alone time, I like to read or play video games. So it's my pleasure to introduce Spencer Mancillas. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I speak basically publicly for a living, but I'm still very nervous to do this. So thank you all for being here. And like I've said to a couple of you this morning, that I don't feel like I can lose in this scenario. So at least some of the pressure will be off. I generally think of myself as a creative person, but I've had a lot on my plate, let's say, these last couple of months. So I basically just took our prompt questions and decided I'll answer those. Not wanting to delve too far out of the basics here. But the 3 questions I think that they generally ask at these men's breakfasts are, the man who influenced you most in your life, a time when your faith has kind of sustained you, and for one thing for which you are profoundly grateful. So I will start with the man who was most influential in my life, and I think like probably many of us, was my dad. My dad's just a really incredible person. He was, as mentioned by Tim, he's Mexican. Both my grandparents are Mexican. They did not cross the border themselves, but both of my great-grandparents did. So they grew up in a very Spanish-speaking household. My father grew up mostly in Texas. I say he was mostly raised by a single mother. My grandfather was around, but he was an alcoholic and was very much not involved in the day-to-day raising. I could probably speak for 20 minutes just about my grandma, my nana, who, like I said, raised my dad almost by herself. She was one of the first enlisted women in the Navy, served in the Naval Reserves, had 4 children, moved from Texas to Michigan. She's just a really incredible woman, just in her own right. But one of the most wonderful things she did was have my dad, who is like I said, just a genuine, kind, nice, awesome person. For most of my life, he has worked with my mom they run a daycare out of their home. They have about 12 kids at a time, and it's not some, I think when I tell people my parents run a daycare, they sometimes thought it was like Central Christian Daycare or something where you've got several hundred kids. It's not. It's just the 2 of them in a house, which is a really nice environment to grow up in. I kind of had built-in friends all my life. I don't think it was the career that my dad planned for himself, but I'll give you kind of his story. He like I said, grew up in Texas and Michigan, had 3 brothers, 1 sister. He met my mom while they were in college at Central Michigan University. He's brilliant. My dad is very smart, but he basically during college couldn't sustain himself. Had no really familial support. My uncles and aunts had grandchildren. My nana was busy. It was basically just my dad, and he was trying to, I think, start a family. So he dropped out his junior year, and basically took a number of odd jobs. This is something I can relate to. He commuted an hour and a half each way to work for about 2 years, managing a muffler man in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He would commute there from Saginaw, Michigan, like I said, about an hour and a half every day. And he basically just did what was necessary to sustain himself and sustain his new family. He worked a number of jobs, like I said, trying to kind of, I think, work his way back towards being in Saginaw, where my mom was raising my brother and I. And actually, I guess on the day that I was born, he came home and said, I quit. I can't keep doing this commute. I'm going to find something else here. And took a number of, he sold cars, sold insurance, and then he started working with my mom running a daycare. And he's been doing that now for 30 years. I would say his biggest strength is just being involved, being there. And for every day of my life, my dad was there. I don't think he ever even left town. So he was involved. He's very talented. He's an awesome carpenter. He's an awesome artist. He's always available for advice or help. He was my, basketball coach, football coach, soccer coach, scout leader growing up. So he basically did everything that he could to be involved in my life and my brother's life. I remember one year in I think it was 9th grade football. I was having a bad time. I did not enjoy it. I'd always liked football, but I did not want to play football this year. I would like pitch a fit before going to practice, and my dad would, not a coach, would just go and watch practice for me, like with me there, and just kind of hang out because he knew it made me more comfortable. Had no role other than that. He was the only dad there doing that. And I think, you would think, like, wouldn't you be embarrassed? Like, no, I wasn't. I was just really happy to have him there. And that was him. He kind of always put himself last, and the family came first, and that often meant that my brother and I came first, which is, I think, what I'm trying to carry now towards my child. So I think that's the person who most profoundly influenced me is definitely my dad. I can't thank him enough. So growing up, I kind of did have what I would call an idyllic childhood. I did not have any struggles. I think the biggest kind of tragedy that struck my life was when our family dog of 10 years died when I was in high school. And that was hard, of course, but that was the biggest tragedy that I had for probably the first 19 years of my life. So pretty idyllic. I think if you could say that, then you're pretty lucky. And I know a lot of that is because of my parents always being around, and I will say that that was a blessing in many ways. But when I got to college, things got hard, and in some ways, I think not having any struggle made life more hard. I went to the University of Michigan for undergraduate, and it was a good experience, I'll say. It was hard to leave, this. I went to a college, or a high school with a graduating class of about 100 people. So when I went to college where I had 20,000, 10, 12,000 people in just my class, it was an adjustment, let's say. And I did okay my first freshman year. I had an okay GPA at the end of the year. It was not definitely what I had in high school, but it was manageable, and I was looking forward to my sophomore year. In my sophomore year, I had a good first semester. My second semester, I remember it was April Fool's Day. My house burned down. I was living in what was called a co-op, which is kind of like a frat house, but you're not a member of a fraternity. It's a cooperative. And I was home, and I smelled like smoke, and I was just thinking somebody's out, having a cigarette on the porch or something like that. And I waited probably about 3-4 minutes, and I'm smelling more smoke, and I start to see some smoke. And there's a couch that was on our porch, which I've since outlawed. They won't even let you have couches on your porch anymore. But it was on fire. Somebody had put out a cigarette either next to it or maybe on it. But it was engulfed, and then our whole house, started to catch fire, and eventually everything did catch fire. That was, we're trying to call all our roommates on April Fool's Day, and they're just not believing it. So that was a hard day. But I remember even then, both my parents, the first thing they did when they knew was hop in the car, come down, and make sure that we were okay. Me and all my roommates, and that was hard. I did go back the next semester. I finished out my classes that year. I obviously didn't do as great probably as I wanted to, but I managed, and I came back. And the next year, about 2 months into classes, my roommate committed suicide. I struggled. I didn't know what to do. I basically took I didn't drop out, but I did take a semester off, and I self-medicated. I drank a lot. I smoked a lot of weed. I went to the casino a lot. It was a very low time in my life, and it was and like I said, I think it was because I'd not experienced any tragedy in my life until this point, where I didn't know what or how to go forward. And my parents saw me doing all of this. They were not happy about it, but I think they were understanding in a way that probably a lot of people wouldn't be. And they got me help. I didn't have to. I saw a therapist. I worked on myself. And I saw that what I was doing was destructive and not, helpful. I think it was helpful to have the semester off and not have to worry about taking classes or anything like that. And I did go back and graduate. At that time, I was basically just done in Ann Arbor, though. I did not want to. I felt like I was getting several signs that this was not where I was supposed to be. And my goal was to kind of, I think, prove that my experience in undergrad was not kind of indicative of who I was or who I wanted to be. I graduated with a 2.6 GPA, and I decided I'm going to try to go to law school, which with the 2.6 is not necessarily easy. I took the LSAT, and I did pretty good on the LSAT, and I applied to basically every school in the Midwest that wasn't Ohio State, which is... that's how I ended up at the University of Cincinnati, which is where I met my wife. We met really kind of our first day of classes. And I think Lindsey, more than anything, has probably informed my spiritual journey. Lindsey grew up, I grew up Catholic. I would say I was like an Easter and Christmas Catholic. I didn't really go to church ever. Except for Easter and Christmas. After some of these events in my life, I would be the only one in my family who did go to church. I don't know why, but there was always some part of me that felt like the faith in the community was important to me. So Lindsey also grew up a non-denominational Christian, but I feel like both of us felt like our churches were not growing the way that we wanted to. So we tried several churches around Cincinnati, and then really we came here just kind of on a whim. Let's try this church out. I think we were visiting her parents that weekend, and the first sermon that we heard was about Micah 6:8, which Lindsey had been kind of bubbling around in her mind for years of how am I going to serve. And it just kind of felt serendipitous to both of us. I think finding this church and finding a community that shared our beliefs was kind of the culmination of our spirit journey. You know, we have had struggles since then, but our church has always been there to sustain us. You know, I think finding this environment and finding the people here have changed our lives, and that is no small statement, but it's absolutely the truth. Yeah. I think the things through which my faith have sustained me kind of culminated in me finding this church. And I guess to tie that all together, the thing for which I'm profoundly grateful is my child, Ewan. I think Lindsey has been very public with our struggles that we had in getting Ewan. We knew kind of going into our family planning that it was going to be a struggle for us. We had to plan for it, let's say. It was never going to be something that was just easy. And we had to go through IVF, several rounds, which is hard. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but it's shots every day. I mean, being the man in that situation is easy. But you are seeing the person you love most struggle every day. And they're not really themselves during this time. You know, there's just a lot of, you know, it's hormones and it changes your attitude about a lot of stuff. But you know, kind of on the other side of that there's something that's going to be worth it all. Or maybe there's not, but you're willing to take this journey together. So we did a first initial round, let's say, of IVF. And the way that it works is you do a transfer, and then about 2 weeks later you have a pregnancy test, and then 5 weeks later you'll have a follow-up, an ultrasound. So our first round, my wife had a positive pregnancy test. 2 weeks later, we were, you know, just elated. We were telling our family, telling our friends, you know, not telling the world yet, because it wasn't that time. But we were, you know, this is what we'd been waiting for. And we got to our, what was called the heartbeat ultrasound, and there wasn't one. You know, all the tests were right. She was pregnant, but she had what was called a blighted ovum, which is essentially an egg that doesn't proceed to the next stage of growth, which was hard to hear. But I passed out when I found that out. You know, I think I had approached this meeting as like, oh, it's just, this is kind of, I get to hear the heartbeat, not thinking that there was a chance that I wouldn't. Which, I mean, it was embarrassing to pass out in some ways, but I more so just felt bad. Like, I felt the focus should be on Lindsey right now, but the nurses are paying attention to me, and like, I don't care. Like, this is not about me right now. And that was, you know, that was hard. That was hard for both of us. It was hard to regroup, and I think we did lay in bed for a whole weekend and just were sad, and cried. And like I said, it's easy for the man in this scenario, because you're just there for the ride. But Lindsey found the strength to do it again, and we did. And we had a transfer this time of 2 embryos, and it was same process. You know, you get the positive pregnancy test at 7 weeks. There were 2 heartbeats. I say heartbeat. I know that's a buzzword, but let's say the electrical stimulations that grow into a heartbeat. So the in doing IVF, you're going to the doctor for a period of time. It's almost every day, and then it slows down to maybe once a week, and then it's once every other 2 weeks. But we had a 12-week check, we had a 13-week check. Everything looks pretty good, and then I think in our 14-week check, one of the embryos wasn't growing right, and it's one of those things when you're like, well, is this normal? Does this mean, like, can we just proceed? Is this going to hurt the other child? And for so much of that, you're just waiting and holding your breath. And when can we find out more? And then it's you're just waiting for the next day, the next 2 days. Eventually, we did find out more. One of our embryos was not growing correctly. It had several, I can't remember the exact medical terminology, issues that are incompatible with life. And this was devastating news. We had to find, well, not only did we have to go out of the state for our medical care that we needed, but we didn't want to do it. We struggled through this whole decision of is this the right thing to do? Is this not the right thing to do? And eventually, being told and learning that this is basically how you make sure that your other child is safe, and is born and is healthy. That the decision was really pretty easy, even though it was difficult to go through with. And how, like, again, my Lindsey is I say that Ewan is the thing I'm profoundly grateful to God for, but really it's Lindsey. To see what she went through, and like I said, just to be an observer is I can't think of the word for it. It's incredible. To get back on the horse and to go through all of that takes a lot of inner strength, and I think Lindsey has that in spades. And I hope to be part of that rock that she relies on, but it's all Lindsey. And that process was hard, but at the end of it, we got Ewan, who is the light of our life. And I think every day that both of us thank God for Ewan and for that experience. Well, maybe not necessarily that experience, but having him at the end of it. There are things in life that, and I think this is kind of one of those lessons that I learned from my dad too, that you just push through, and maybe you don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be, but having that faith that it's going to work out is I think what has sustained me. And that's been a long journey. And I meet a lot of people through my work and through just life. And I think they often describe me as level-headed, as chill, as pretty laid back. And I think that's accurate. But the truth is, I think that I've just learned to place it all in his hands. And that there's only so much that we can influence, and what we can, we should, but what we can't, we can't. And accepting that and accepting his grace is really what bears me through. So that's my story. Thanks for listening.
Well, Spencer, we are just immensely grateful for your story and for the vulnerability and sharing so many of the big things that have been part of your life. We are certainly grateful for you and your entire family and everything that you contribute in this community and here at Central. So thank you, and thanks be to God for you. Next month, we will be returning to the second Saturday, and our speaker will be Adam Dahl, who is the proprietor of Dollhouse Fudge. I do not know if that changes our menu for breakfast or not. I cannot predict that, but Adam actually recently won second place in the Best of Lexington for Best Dessert Shop or something along those lines. So that will be a fun time as well. So I do think that there's more of that great food over there, that really healthy food that gets us off to a good start. So please do enjoy a little more conversation, a little more coffee, and a little more breakfast. And I'm grateful to be with you all this morning.